I hope you really enjoy the early church. If you want to understand the church of today, you really need to study the early church of the first 5 centuries. And some would go even further and say that if you want to understand Western culture and society, you really need to study the early church of the first 5 centuries, because Europe's history is profoundly shaped by those first 5 centuries of Christian worship and church life and activity. In a sense, the men and women of those first 5 centuries are our spiritual grandparents. And when we study the early church, we're studying something about our own spiritual DNA. If you want to know, for example, why we worship as we worship today, with the Eucharist as the centre of our worship, you simply need to go back to the early church and see how central the Eucharist was to people then. If you want to understand a doctrine like the doctrine of the Trinity, you need to go back to the early church and work out why they used words as they did to try and describe this mystery about God. If you want to understand the significance of bishops, priests and deacons, study the early church. If monasticism is your thing, the monastic movement had its founding in the early church. The charismatic movement can be found there. The desire for a pure church can be found there. Persecution of the church can be found back there. In all kinds of ways, we are who we are today because of those first 5 centuries. People say that you should learn from the past, and to learn from the past is life. To live in it is death. We don't want to live in the early church, but we do want to learn from it in order to have a bit more life in our own following of the Lord Jesus. So I hope through your study of the early church, you'll not only understand a little bit about why you are a Christian as you are today, and where your Christian DNA comes from, but you'll find a little bit more life in following Christ today. I hope you enjoy early church history.